Okay, so I'll just show this for the recording. Okay. And then you can review the recordings to get all the information. We will also send this through email if you have joined us on RowdyLink. But this is our second meeting. We do count 6 meetings for credit. Our 7th meeting is not counted towards credit. You have to attend 2 out of 3 events. So these are our 3 events for the semester. We do not have requirements for socials. We did have a social last week, which was our virtual game night. So thank you to those that came to our social. You have to pay dues. If you are having financial struggles, message me so we can work something out. And then you have to complete volunteer credits and join us on social media. These are alternative membership requirements. These are for the people that have scheduling conflict. So if you aren't able to because of school or work, just send me a message and we can discuss getting you approved for alternative membership. So this is our social media. Make sure to join us so that you can stay up to date with all the information. And then this is our group me. So this is a new QR code. I know y'all were struggling with the other one. So this is an updated one. There shouldn't be an issue. Most of y'all are already on group me. And then these are our virtual volunteering opportunities. A lot of y'all have been completing letters. So thank you so much for staying up with that. If you do have questions, send me a message and I can answer those questions for you. 7 Cups. So this just goes into detail for the 7 Cups application, since I know a lot of you have questions. And then these are our in-person volunteering. So we did have one on the 4th, which was 2 weeks ago. And then we have one coming up on the 2nd of October. We are going to try and schedule more volunteering in person. So just stay up to date with that information. We are wanting to partner up with Special Olympics, which is a new organization that Ethan found. So we are going to try and get dates for that. And then we have a tabling opportunity coming up September 20th, which is next Monday. Signups will be made available after today. Okay, so these are our instructions for RowdyLink. You can click this link to go to the YouTube video. I made this YouTube video about 2 semesters ago, so I will work on making a new one because maybe some information changed. So in that video, I only discussed virtual volunteering. So I'll try to make a new one with the in-person volunteering since it is a little bit different. Okay, so our tabling. So these are pictures from our past tablings. These are our awesome officers. Again, we have one coming up next Monday. This does count for volunteering opportunities. So we do it by shifts. So it's like 1-hour shifts. And then there's a setup and a breakdown shift. Okay, so these are the meeting dates. So today we are going to discuss stress management and coping. This is actually replacing the meeting that was canceled last semester due to the snowstorm. So I'm excited to have it since I know with COVID and everything, it's been really, really stressful. Then in 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a new professor night. So I'm really excited for this meeting because we're going to have several professors come out and introduce themselves. These professors started within that virtual time. So because they started within that time, it's been hard for them to get to know the students and vice versa. So it's a great way for you to get to know your new faculty. Okay, and then our events. So we have an event next week, which is the graduate school panel, and it's going to be followed by Q&A. I know some people requested that, so we always do a Q&A after any meeting or event. Okay, these are our social dates. So the next one is October 7th, which is in person at 6:30 at Chicken and Pickle, which is a restaurant. We will not be paying for everyone's meal, so you're responsible for your own meal. And then we have a back to school raffle basket. The winner will be announced through social media tomorrow. And our merchandise, I'm just going to show you real quick. There you go. Our payments, you'll pay dues through here as well. And then coming up, we have our graduate school panel, and then we have our new professor night. And then we are tabling again on Monday. So Best Fest is going to happen this semester, which is October 15th. For those of you that are new to UTSA and don't know what Best Fest is, Best Fest it usually happens during homecoming week. So it will be October 15th, which is a Friday. And a bunch of organizations go out in front of the Convo Center and just sell things. We have some rides. I don't know if it's going to be exactly the same because of the pandemic, but I'm really excited to finally do this again. It's been like a year since we haven't had this, so I'm really, really excited for this. So we will be out there. We will offer volunteering for those of you that want to help us manage the booth, and more information will be given out as we get information. Okay, and that is it. So we will welcome Dr. MC now. And Dr. MC, are you wanting to share a slide, Dr. MC?
Yes, please. If you can just let me share, I can do that.
Okay. So you should have access now.
Okay, I have to get to 1 second. I just have to get to the share.
While she does that, don't forget to sign in. We'll resend the link right now. That closes at 5:20, so please make sure you sign in.
All right, can y'all see it now?
Yes.
Okay. And if someone could just email me, I am teaching abnormal psych. I had a whole bunch of questions yesterday about Psych Club. Send me an email or a link that I can give them to find out more and get connected, because sometimes they can't find it on Rowdy links and all that stuff. So someone let me know.
Yeah, so I will send you that information tonight.
Perfect. So I'm going to be talking today about coping with change and as a version of stress management. As Debbie said, we originally talked about this back during the snow event. I enjoy this picture because this was my backyard. And if you look very carefully, stop it. Your pictures are covering the picture, but you can see our semi-feral outdoor cat looking around like, what the heck is this white stuff? And that's his footprints on the deck. I also liked the picture of Rowdy, someone who put a mask on him. And I thought those sort of symbolize some of the kinds of changes we're all dealing with. So what I want to talk about today is, stress and coping in general, but really to put it in the context of some of the new challenges that we've all faced. Now, of course, this pandemic is not something new anymore, but it is important to talk about how much it's changing our lives. Oftentimes when something big and stressful happens, we have an end date in sight. We know that if we get to finals or we get to the wedding or we get to whatever event, things will start to go back to normal. The problem with the pandemic is it's now been, well over a year and a half. We still don't know exactly how to respond appropriately. There's a lot of conflict about what the best choices are for opening school, closing school, jobs, restaurants, vaccines, masks. There's just a lot of confusion. And as hard as it was to transfer online, which we all had to do over spring break in the spring of 2020, now a lot of us are trying to figure out how to go back to being in person. I did meet with my abnormal psych class in person yesterday, and we were kind of laughing about the struggle to find your shoes and your backpack and parking and all the things that were so routine before we shut down and now seem so foreign or strange to deal with. I'm kind of curious if any of you have had an in-person face-to-face class again this week and what your response was to the stress of going back. You can put it in the chat, or if anyone's brave enough, you can raise your hand. I don't know if I can see everybody raising their hand. So if Debbie or someone can let me know. if anyone wanted to talk. Okay, I see some people aren't starting until Thursday. The thing, oh my gosh, 60 people in a classroom with 30 seats. That's not good. My room was about 100 and some in a room with maybe 130 seats. So it wasn't horrible, but yeah, the walking, you know what? I got tired lecturing yesterday. I had to stand up for 2 hours and lecture. And for a year and a half now, I've been lecturing, staring into my computer and not standing up. So we have a lot going on that's different. And some of you have heard me talk about Paul Slovik before. He is a researcher who spent his career looking at risk and how we assess risk, what we think makes something scary or controllable. And this was a chart I found online last night that I really liked because it's using the criteria that Slovik developed through his research to compare 3 different things that people might consider to be stressful, or at least to compare to each other as stressful events. So what are those categories? The first one is how much choice you have over the event. Is it voluntary or involuntary? The pandemic was certainly involuntary for everybody. We weren't counting on it. Coming back to school is more split because people were able to sign up for classes that might be in person or might be online. Although I'm sure some of you got stuck with a class in a modality that wasn't your preference just because you needed that class. But of course, as you look at this, we assess different forms of stress and different situations differently based on where they fall on that category. Chronic versus catastrophic. So a chronic event is something that's ongoing and problematic. You know, if you live in a place that gets hurricanes or tornadoes, it's a chronic problem. It's not catastrophic most of the time, but it is if you're in the eye of the storm. We as humans are really concerned about things that are common or normal versus unusual and things that we're going to dread. And that is part of what's really happening in the pandemic. You know, we're used to the flu. We're used to head colds. We're used to getting kids vaccinations for measles and mumps. But COVID seemed to come out of the blue. We all dread getting sick with an unknown illness. And so that really increased our fear. You can see the comparisons here between, say, X-rays and climate change and nuclear power. How fatal or disruptive something could be. The pandemic has been incredibly stressful because it could, in theory, impact anybody. And we know that for some people, it will be dangerous. Others may not even know they're sick. So there's that uncertainty. And of course, there's also the piece of not knowing what you're exposed to. Oftentimes with the virus, people who are asymptomatic or just getting sick don't even know it, and they could expose us. With COVID, it takes 10, 14 days to know if you got sick. Other traumas and stressors can take less or more time. And then, of course, we've got the control and the science pieces. Now, why am I showing this to you? Because I want us to think about why this has been an unusually stressful year and a half. We had to change our lives. We've had to change how we cope. We've had to manage different sorts of challenges. And the pandemic falls into a lot of the categories that make something very stressful. If you look at it, it is something that would be expected to make people stressed. Now, one of the points about Slovik's work is that he'll use a chart like this to compare, for example, driving in your neighborhood and flying on in an airplane. And lots of people rank flying in a plane as more stressful, more dangerous than driving their car, even though statistically it's more dangerous to get in a car. And you can see again how that would play out on these sorts of criteria, because in your car, you feel at least like you have some control, like you know what you're doing, like it's familiar. Whereas when you are in a plane, it's technological, you're counting other people, etc. So I've kind of laid out why the pandemic itself might be stressful, but I also want to map it on to what we know about other kinds of disasters. Some of you could have seen me show this slide in another lecture, but this is what we know about how people respond to more traditional disasters like a fire or an earthquake or a tornado, where there's a set moment of impact. And then there's a period of time where everyone pulls together. You know, you see people rescuing neighbors and first responders doing heroic things. And then you enter a period of disillusionment. Now, after a typical, say, a hurricane, I do disaster response. I went down to Rockport, Texas, a few weeks after Hurricane Harvey hit there. And, you know, people were still talking about how much they'd helped each other, but they were already getting frustrated about the fact that gas stations and grocery stores weren't opening up again, that they were having difficulty getting FEMA and other people to answer responses. That disillusionment phase can go on for quite some time after disaster. And I would argue that even though the pandemic is still going on, the Delta surge was a trigger event, a place that really kind of confused and put us back into this disillusionment path. Because during the summer, we all thought, okay, we're getting vaccinated, things are going to be normal. And now they're not. I would be curious again, if anyone wants to add in the chat or just speak up. Does this chart resonate with you in terms of the pandemic or other things? See the so if do to manage change, there are actually quite a few things that we know based on psychological research that matter. You know, this is probably preaching to the choir here in the Student Psych Club, but the first step in understanding and coping with stress is developing self-awareness, insight into how you're responding. But that is far harder than it sounds. And we are not raised in a culture that really focuses on talking about honest feelings. We're kind of raised in a culture that thinks that being tough and strong, hiding vulnerabilities, you know, faking it till you make it is the way to go. And that's part of the reason we have so much problem with the stigmas around mental health and those sorts of things. But understanding how this pandemic and how the opening, the transition back to school will affect you has a lot to do with understanding yourself. Now, some of you probably identify as extroverts. If you found the entire pandemic incredibly painful because you couldn't see your friends, go to concerts, go to activities, you're probably chomping at the bit to get out and go back to class and start up sort of your normal life. On the other hand, if you are an introvert, and I have a daughter who identifies as an introvert, she kind of liked having a socially acceptable reason to not be busy, to tell everyone, no, I can't do that, or to not even have people asking her to do social things on weekends. So understanding where you are in relation to a stressful event matters. Some of that will also have to do with the actual situation you find yourself in. I would say about a third of my class yesterday, it's a 2000 level abnormal psych class. About a third of the folks, this was the first time they'd been on campus. They might have been here for 2 or 3 semesters, but if they came as a transfer student on campus, and a student who is coming up on your senior year and are really hoping that you get to spend that year in person on campus and having a real graduation in the spring. There are lots of different permutations of how your own circumstances might influence how you're coping with something like this. Of course, as humans, we're herd animals. We don't do well in isolation. Even introverts usually have a small group of trusted people they spend time with. And so part of the drama and stress of the pandemic was being cut off from connection to others, whether that was the people you hung around with at work, just getting together with your family for a holiday, and despite all of the social media, the phones, email, it's harder to communicate online than it is in person. I'm going to guess that quite a few of you experienced sort of that frustration during the pandemic of people misinterpreting, misunderstanding what you're saying when you communicate with them through social media. Things that might have been clear when you were in person, that you were being sarcastic, or you weren't being sarcastic, or you were being sympathetic. Those cues, those nonverbal cues, can get lost. At the same time, we were all very aware that we needed to work to maintain connection because we didn't have our normal, basic, easy ways of just running into people and talking. My mom is almost 90. She still lives by herself. She's very active. And at the beginning of the pandemic, she kept complaining about being lonely. And my sister and I, who are in different cities and work, both kept saying, well, but she already lived alone. She wasn't that active anyway. What does she miss? What we were missing is that she had been walking her dog with friends every day. She knew people when she went to the pharmacist, when she went to the dry cleaners. She had like a network of people she talked to during her daily life that she couldn't, especially during the initial part of the shutdown, when even when elderly people went out, they were supposed to go to the early morning times and other things. Curious if others of you had observations about this disruption in communication and connection that occurred during the pandemic, or ways of working around it, either way. Ironically, the pandemic did make both my mom and my mother-in-law finally figure out how to text and get pictures. So maybe there was a good side of that as well, because the one thing they did still want to know is how their grandkids were doing. So that was helpful. Another thing, and you go back to the Slovik chart if you want, and look at that, stop it, is that we don't like things that are uncertain. We like to have go-to solutions, known solutions, because, for example, there are experts who can tell us what to do. We don't like to wait for things that are going to be bad to see if they're happening or not. So when we do get into a stressful situation, a crisis, it can be hard at first to be flexible in our problem solving, to say, oh gosh, maybe there are different ways to do this. We all faced it when the pandemic first started and we had to switch online and figure out how to do classes from the house. Now we're facing it going back. Who's going to wear a mask? How are you going to sit in class? Where are you going to park? What are the different ways you can solve problems? And one of the signs that we talk about in terms of resilience is flexibility, trying new things when something else isn't working. And that may lead to establishing entire new routines. I'm sure a lot of you have been reading about how many workers are requesting not to go back to the office full time. It's going to be interesting to see whether the pandemic ends up creating finally that flexible workspace where a lot of people work from home part of the week and go into work part of the time. Many of us who thought that we would never like teaching online found out there were some advantages. My office hour discussions after class have actually been better than my office hours on campus, because in office hours, only a couple people come. The discussions sometimes were really good. So now my goal is to figure out if I can keep some online discussions going along with the class so that we can have that connection in a way that wasn't happening during the actual lectures or wasn't happening one-on-one with folks. When I do disaster mental health work, I go out with a group called Green Cross. They are made up of psychologists, counselors, and other people that focus on psychological first aid or helping people in crisis. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is the need to make things normal, to help people understand why they feel stressed, to give words to why they feel stressed, to normalize patterns where people might think, oh, I'm having trouble sleeping and I can't remember anything. There must be something wrong with me. When the truth is that's a normal response to stress. And we very much push people to establish new routines. I worked in a shelter down after Hurricane Ike, and people were living there with their entire family, 2, 4, 6 kids, everything disrupted. They couldn't go home because of the flooding. And one of the things that parents needed to do was set bedtimes, regular times to get up, maybe have their kids work on not necessarily homework. They weren't in school, but certainly, multiplication, reading. Create a pattern, because humans function better with patterns. We don't like it when it's chaotic and we don't know what the next thing is going to be. And then the last thing is self-care. And I know some of you have had my classes. You're probably all sick of my talking about it, but there's a tendency, and this is back to that, suck it up and accomplish and work hard idea, but we have a tendency in this culture to value work, to think we can skip sleep if that'll give us more time, to not exercise and eat right and take care of ourselves when we get busy or stressed. And even sometimes to see our social connections, our leisure time as a waste of time. We're not accomplishing enough. We should be working harder. And that is exactly the reverse of what we need to do when we're stressed. The brain doesn't work well without sleep and without food. And it can't just be candy and soda. It has to have a balanced diet. We found out during the pandemic that getting outside, even for just a few minutes, could change people's moods. When we were all going to school and working, a lot of times, the amount of time you spent outside was the time it took you to get from your car into the office or wherever you were headed. There's been talk about, increasing outdoor time, increasing exercise. But I think that we could almost say that in some ways the pandemic was beneficial in the sense that the lockdown made some of us think about different problems, new routines, and looking at self-care. Now, this is a formula and a book that I love. I have talked about it multiple times, and I'm going to talk about it now, and then I'm going to open things up to questions. The book is called Rapid Relief from Emotional Distress by Emery and Campbell. It's an older book, but you don't need newer editions. Coping with stress from a cognitive point of view has stayed pretty consistent over time. I've altered the ACT formula a little, but I love this formula. Very, very simple. And what it says is to manage stress, there are 3 key things you have to do. 1A is accept reality. What does that mean? It means you can't spend a bunch of time thinking if only. If only the pandemic hadn't happened. If only I weren't a senior. If only I had more money. If only my partner would behave differently. If only I didn't have a flat tire. Anytime you're thinking if, you are not grappling with the actual reality of the situation. I am often rushing from one obligation to another. Sometimes when I'm late, I'll be thinking, if only I'd left sooner, if only the light would change, if only a parking spot would open. At some point, I have to get on board with reality and say I might be late. So what am I going to do if I accept the reality? I'm going to have to create a vision. Am I going to call somebody? Am I going to just get there late and it'll be okay? Am I going to make major change in my life? Sometimes in my private practice, I have people saying, you know, if only my spouse would change. And at some point, we get to the really hard discussion where you say, maybe they're not going to change. They don't see it as a problem. They don't want to change. So your reality is that behavior is part of your life if you stay with this person. So what's your vision going forward? Can you adapt? Can you build around it? Can you do something to change how you respond? Or even in an extreme case, is this a deal breaker and you need to change the relationship? It is so hard to create a vision. It's easy to criticize what other people write or say or do. It's much harder to come up with good solutions to big problems. But that creative vision is absolutely crucial. And if you do A and C right, then T isn't as hard. You can take action. You can manage the situation. I use this ACT formula for everything from being late to a meeting to dealing with health outcomes, with losses, to things that I really, really did not want to have to deal with. And you might say, well, you know, some things are so bad that this formula couldn't help. I've helped use this formula with people who had lost, you know, a family member, a parent, a spouse. The point is that once you realize that that person is no longer part of your life, you have options. You can freeze your life and never build or grow from there. You can do other things, but what we always work on is creating a vision. What did that person provide in your life that you need to find another way to gain? What did you most admire or respect about that person that you can now build into your life or share with others as a way of honoring them? And that gets you to a point of taking action. Again, I have 2 pictures here that I wanted to talk about, and then I will be happy to go with questions. The first one is a can picture I took when I went out to work after the Paradise Fire in California. This was a small town up in the mountains that was completely destroyed a couple of years ago. 82 people died. The mountain it's steep and they were up in a valley and not everyone got out. But their county, Butte County, had started producing these cans with water within weeks of the event. I don't know if you can read it, but it does say Butte County proud. It is labeled resilience, but it was water in what would normally be more like a soda can because so many people didn't have running water on their property. How does this fit the ACT formula? To me, what it says is the reality is we've lost our community. It's going to take a long time to build it back, but we need connection. We need each other, and we need to think about what we can do going forward that will inspire us so we can take action to build things. The other picture is a phoenix. This is at the site of the Mackenzie River fires, the Holiday Farm fire. It was last year, just about this time, that I went out to Oregon to work there. And this I have not seen yet, but apparently some of the survivors built this phoenix on one of the sites that was completely burnt. And all of the things they used to build it were rubble, things that had been burnt during the fire. Again, are they saying this is the reality they wanted? Of course not. Are they saying that things are going to be exactly the way they were before? No. But what they are saying is they're moving towards a vision of rebuilding, of making things different, and of taking action. Both from my psych practice, but also from the disaster work, is how resilient people are. I have stood in shelters and talked to people who'd lost their house, and while they're crying, they're saying, you know, when we rebuild, I'm going to fix everything I didn't like about the house before. I think we can use the pandemic and the transition back from the pandemic to do the same thing. If you liked not being as busy, then don't sign up for every activity again. Leave yourself some quiet weekends. If you really found that your friends didn't come through for you enough during the pandemic, then reach out, try to make some new connections. Think about who and who you're spending time with and what you're doing. If you found it hard to study on Zoom, then go to class. Before the pandemic, about 30% of students didn't ever come to class. You all know after the first week, half the room would be empty. Yesterday, I had a lot of people in class, and I hope that stays, because now people realize that going to class is not a waste of time or an effort that is not worth it, but really almost a privilege, because when it got taken away from us, we didn't like it. If you're not getting the grades you want, you can keep wishing something will change, or you can say, you know what, the reality is I'm not doing something effective here. Am I in the wrong major? Am I studying wrong? Am I not taking good notes? Do I need to go to tutoring? What is it I can do to create a vision and make changes? Sometimes it's little. I've talked to students where the change they needed to make was to quit highlighting in the book and take notes. I've also talked to students where the change they needed to make was to switch to the major they really wanted to be in instead of the one they were in. And this will resonate with some of you in psych. Often that's because they're in science or business or something they thought would be practical, but they don't like it. And they love psych, but they're afraid to make the change. So my bottom line here is that coping with transition and stress and change is part of human life. There isn't usually an easy solution, but we are resilient people and we can make those changes. If you're looking to read a little more about cognitive psychology, take a look at this book, Rapid Relief from Emotional Distress. You can get used copies online for virtually nothing. So I'm going to quit sharing my screen and see if anybody has questions, things they want to talk about, responses, or, just general, how's all this feeling to all of you? I can share these slides with Debbie as well if people want, anyone wants to have them after. So what do you think?
What was the name of that book again?
Rapid Relief from Emotional Distress.
Okay, thank you. This is a little off topic, but I was wondering if you could talk about your private practice. What sort of therapy do you do?
I trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, and I came out to UTSA to work as a faculty member. And for probably the first 14, 15 years, I didn't have a side practice, but I missed it. So I started a small private practice. I only see 4 or 5 clients a week. Before the pandemic, I had office space over in Stone Oak. I sublet it out and had been doing Zoom and phone, but of course I'm trying to negotiate back to get some space in the office until the sublet runs out. But I mostly see people, probably more women than men, a lot of depression, anxiety, adjustment disorder, kind of basic life stress sorts of things. But I just really like doing therapy, and I kind of like keeping my hand in. I got involved in the disaster mental health work probably about 9 or 10 years ago as well. And the whole field of psychological first aid, mental health approaches is really growing. If people are interested in it, you might think in the spring about having someone come and speak. There's some folks at our campus counseling center who are trained to teach some of those topics. So it might be interesting. The point is not that you have to be a therapist, it's that you are doing the basic responses like you would, you don't have to be a cardiologist to do CPR, that kind of thing. What else? What else can I answer?
There was a question in the chat that what are some tools one can use to become more grounded?
I really like the mindfulness techniques. You can also do meditation. People find lots of different ways, but we're so good at thinking about the past and the future. If you just try to pay attention in a day to how often you're doing things and not even aware of what you're doing. For example, have you ever been driving home and you realize you pull in your driveway and you don't even really remember the last few minutes you were just on autopilot while you thought about something else? Or you go to the grocery store and you forget things because by the time you got to the grocery store, you're not even thinking about that. You're on the next task. So mindfulness has a lot to do with focusing on the here and now, your body, your breathing, just where you are. I find that that's helpful for grounding, but a lot of people also like things that can just remind them of the bigger picture. You get really frustrated at work or school, and you go and take a walk outside and look at the stars or look at the sky, and you suddenly go, oh yeah, there's more to things than this. But it's hard to explain how complicated our lives are compared to the world our brains evolved to live in. 100 years ago, there was no technology. You didn't have constant TV and deadlines and social media. And that's how our brain processes things. And now we're in constant sensory overload, and that makes it hard to stay grounded. I see a couple people in the chat talked about being like my daughter, being introverted and being happy to stay home. And to you, I would say, create a balance. You don't want to become a hermit, but I found that we went from really being busy almost every night of the week because of my practice and everything else, and then cramming social stuff on the weekend. Turned out we kind of liked having entire weekends sometimes when we didn't go anywhere. So we're going to try not to book every weekend from here on out with activities. And I think we can all think about what fit for us and what we want to keep and what we don't want to keep. I see someone here has mentioned, looking at the stars. More and more research suggests that humans respond well to natural light and natural settings and animals and trees. An author to look at if you want is Richard Louv, L-O-U-V. He's done a lot of writing on what he calls nature deficit disorder, on how in modern life, we're just not outside. People 100 years ago had to walk or ride a horse to get anywhere. They didn't have air conditioning. You had to grow your own food. It was so different when you spent a lot of your life outside compared to the modern world. where, you could technically spend 99% of your time inside. Like I said, just running to the car once in a while. What else? I'll tell you, one of the advantages of having these meetings on Zoom is, do y'all remember when we used to meet in the University Center? And there was always a club coming in after us, and at 10 of, they'd start coming in the door and making us rush and leave. So at least we don't have that pressure. And it looks like you have a really good turnout for the talks. But I think that these kinds of discussions are really important. And here's someone who's put gardening. Someone else has put puppies. You don't even have to have a green thumb. There are little kits you can buy where all you're doing is growing some herbs in your kitchen window, but that can make you feel connected and feel like you're doing something. Again, you're in the stage where you got to make schoolwork. Most of you have to work too to make schoolwork, but you don't want to fall into that trap of thinking I'll relax later. Because I guarantee you, as soon as you get to the degree, then you're either going to want a job or grad school. And then you can say, well, I'll relax when that's established. And then it's the promotion, and then it's the next thing. And you kind of, part of being grounded is paying attention to where you are at the time. Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, that kind of wraps up. I know you guys usually have a few things you need to cover just to wrap up the meeting, but I so appreciate being invited. And I think I'll be back. I lose the dates, but the grad panel. And I am really happy to see this much activity in the club. I know that Dr. Lawson and Dr. Scott are very excited about working with y'all. So good luck going forward, and certainly keep in touch with me as well.
Dr. MC, if you have like 1 more minute, Sarai sent a question in there as well.
Absolutely.
She said, are there any tools you have for those beginning to get out there more, how one can be proactive while maintaining self-care?
It's a really hard question right now. And I don't know if you're talking about proactive about your schedule or proactive about getting exposed to other people who aren't maybe managing the pandemic the same way you are. And I think there are some good books. I can't remember the name right now, but I can look it up and share it with Debbie later. But some of it's setting boundaries, deciding what you're comfortable with. That's not always easy. I have a group of friends from college. So that tells you how long I've known these people. They were in the dorms my first year at Santa Barbara. And during the pandemic, we started doing monthly Zoom meetings, which have been great. And before the surge, they were talking about coming out here to San Antonio in the fall and spending a couple days at the Riverwalk kind of as a reunion. Well, then the surge started. Then we found out that one of the group, someone I really like, has chosen not to get vaccinated. And that started a whole discussion about who felt comfortable and who didn't. And we ended up putting off the reunion till spring or summer, but the pandemic's raising different issues, things that we never had to deal with before. Fortunately, this group of women, we were able to talk it through, but sometimes it's harder than others. And that's where really being clear on your priorities and what's right for you is going to matter a lot.
There was one more question. It says, sometimes I use self-care as a way to procrastinate what I need to do. Do you have any tips with separating the two?
Yeah, it all comes down to behavior modification. What you need to do is use self-care as the reward for doing the stuff you didn't want to do. So let's say you've got to read a chapter in a book and then you want to do your fingernails. Set it up so that doing your nails is contingent on finishing the chapter. It's called the Premack principle. You use a behavior you wanted to do anyway as a reward for something else. Or if it's hard for you to hold off like that and you find you're giving in anyway, then you can try setting up a schedule that's spread out. For example, let's say you've got a couple hours of studying tonight. You don't want to do it. You're tired. It's hard. Make yourself a written schedule. You're going to read whatever class for 45 minutes and then schedule 15 minutes of self-care. You're going to go sit outside. You're going to make a call to a friend. You might even have to set timers or beepers on your phone to go back and study. But you use the self-care to motivate yourself to do the other stuff. And what eventually starts to come through is, we all know this. You don't want to do the work, you procrastinate, you do something else. You kind of enjoy the TV show or the walk, but in the back of your mind is all the anxiety about what you still have to study. It's a lot more fun to do the self-care when you've taken out the anxiety by doing the studying. This won't work though if you save everything up till the night before an exam, because then there is no room for self-care. So you want to have a plan for the week or the month or the period of time so that you can say, okay, I don't like reading that chapter, the chapters in this book, then I'm only going to read half an hour a day for the next 2 weeks. And that way I'll get through those chapters and I can reward myself after. I've even, in my long academic career, used academic tasks that I like better than others as the reward. So I have to get through the one I don't want to do to work on the one I do want to do. Does that make sense? I don't know if you can hear, my cat just said, no, nothing makes sense. Where's dinner? Come up here, Duke. You want to come join the site club? Yes. Come and see them. He says cats have no problem with self-care. They just do it. So, yeah, he can be the club mascot. He'd love to. He photobombs all of my lectures anyway. This is Duke. And he's interested in some food. That's really why he's here.
Does anybody have any other questions for either Dr. MC or for me?
I have a question for you, Debbie.
Okay.
So I signed up on Rowdy Link, but I'm still not receiving the emails.
Okay, I'll take a, when did you sign up? I believe you've been a member, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'll take a look into that, and I can send you directly the emails that we've already sent out.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
All righty, well, stay safe, everyone. If you're down in the Houston area, I hope you're not getting too much water, and I will see you all at the next event.
Yes, September 23rd. Please sign out if you haven't already. If I know I got a few messages about technical difficulties, please send me a message if you haven't, and I can give you credit. I know with the storm, it's kind of like crazy. I know a lot of people lost power. My family lost power. So, you know, I'm going to be very flexible here. So just message me if there's anything going on. Other than that, I am going to end the meeting. And if you have questions, again, just send me a direct message and I will see y'all next week. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. MC.